She was peeling an orange in the kitchen when she dropped the bomb casual, as if she were noting the rain outside. Her eyes flicked to her phone screen, not even bothering to meet mine, that familiar smug curl at the edge of her lips as she leaned against the granite counter juice, dripping from her fingers like she'd already washed her hands of me. Go on, move out. Lisa tossed the words over her shoulder, like she was dismissing a hired hand who'd outlived his usefulness in her family's sprawling empire. No fight, no tears, just the icy precision of someone who decided I was yesterday's news. She bit into a segment, chewing deliberately, savoring the bitterness that mirrored her tone. I didn't feed her the drama she craved. No yelling, no begging, no sharp retort to make her eyes roll in that practiced way. I let the silence stretch thick and uncomfortable until she finally glanced up, expecting the usual pushback. When it didn't come, her smirk faltered just a twitch, but enough to show the crack. I brushed past her without a word, my shoulder grazing the door frame to our bedroom, as if erasing her touch from my skin. I yanked my worn duffel from under the bed, the same one I'd carried when I first arrived here, back when I was the lucky immigrant they'd grudgingly folded into their all-American fold. As I folded my shirts, I caught my reflection in the mirror, not furious, not broken, just focused eyes narrowed like they used to get before sealing a deal in my old life, before I trusted families like hers. From the kitchen, Lisa kept monologuing, not really to me, but loud enough to sting. You've been dragging us down anyway. You'll bounce back or crash and burn. Who knows? That last bit came with a chuckle, the kind that pretends to be light, but slices like a hidden blade. Her father's voice echoed in my head. Then Harold, the self-made patriarch, half slurred at last year's Thanksgiving table. You're damn lucky to be here, boy. My daughter could do way better than some border jumper with a sob story. I'd grinned through it back then, biting my tongue. But now I saw Lisa had inherited his playbook word for word. The more I packed, the quieter she got. She hadn't banked on me folding so neatly. In her script, I was supposed to claw back, prove my worth, beg to stay in their kingdom. But I wasn't dancing to that tune. This wasn't defeat. It was my first real move. I zipped the bag, snatched my jacket from the closet. She looked up from her phone as I passed through the kitchen, again eyebrows arching in fake shock. You're really leaving? I locked eyes with her for the first time that day. You told me to. My voice was flat, almost disinterested. Her smirk returned, but it looked painted on. Well, good riddance out there, she said, like a queen banishing a peasant. I stepped into the crisp air duffel, biting into my shoulder, and let the door click shut. The world tasted sharper, already freer. She thought she'd scrubbed me from her canvas. What she didn't realize was I'd just stepped outside her frame, taking the brush with me. Walking to my truck boots crunching on the gravel path, I glanced at the rutted drive leading to their vast farm. That road had layers of history, mine included. And tucked in my back pocket was a faded document no one in that house had dusted off in years. A paper with my signature and a clause that could rewrite their story. Lisa thought move out meant disappear. To me, it meant reposition. She'd just shoved me into the one spot she'd never wanted outside her fortress, holding the skeleton key to its collapse. But this wasn't just about a road. No, The rot ran deeper. Harold's farm wasn't built on hard work alone. It thrived on shadows. Back when I married into this, I was Alejandro, the Mexican-American entrepreneur who'd clawed his way up from nothing thinking love bridged divides. They saw me as the exotic addition tolerable as long as I played nice. But over the years, I'd seen the underbelly, Harold exploiting undocumented workers from my own community, paying them pennies under the table, threatening deportation if they complained. Lisa knew turned a blind eye. Hell, she'd even joked about it at family dinners. Daddy's just smart with labor costs. Her brother Derek, the golden boy, had stolen my business ideas to climb his corporate ladder, smirking as he did. And Margaret, the silent matriarch, nodded along her approval, as cold as her pies. That night in my sparse apartment, a bed, a table, and that ancient steel filing cabinet, I felt the coil of resentment tighten. But it was laced with clarity. The easement paper wasn't just leverage. It was a loaded gun. And hidden in my files were more records of Harold scams, skimming government subsidies meant for small farms, buying out poor neighbors with forged deeds. I'd kept them quiet for family's sake. No more. As I unrolled the old survey map, pinning it down with a mug and my knife, the black line of that road stared back their only vein to the world. 10 years ago, when storms had gutted it, they'd been desperate. Harold, drowning in debt from his shady deals, begged me to front the cash. I did, under terms full rights to me, no questions. But I'd slipped in a buried clause if they ever violated ethical standards, like fraud or exploitation. The rights could trigger a full land audit, potentially voiding their holdings. They signed without reading the fine print, too grateful then. Gratitude. It evaporated fast, replaced by slurs and sidelong glances at county fairs. No outsider touches our land, especially not some wetback with a checkbook. Now with Lisa's dismissal ringing in my ears, that clause hummed like a live wire. This wasn't petty, it was poetic. They'd built their throne on broken backs, including mine. Time to pull the rug and watch the fall. 10 years ago, I stood on that same gravel road, more crater than path. Back then watching mud swallow truck tires like quicksand. A spring storm had torn it apart, leaving Harold's farm, cut off deliveries, stalled cattle, starving his empire, bleeding cash. Harold, red-faced and pacing, barked into his phone, daily cursing the county for ignoring his pleas. Back then, I was younger, naive, still believing marrying Lisa meant I'd earned a seat at their table. I was Alejandro, the guy who'd hustled from nothing to a fat savings account after a tech deal that winter. When I offered to fix their road, it wasn't charity, it was strategy. We sat at their oak table, coffee steaming, while I laid out the terms. I'll cover every cent, I said, voice steady. In return, I get full access rights to the road, not shared, not least mine. Harold laughed, a booming, patronizing sound, slapping the table like I'd cracked a killer joke. Hell, Alejandro, you're paying. Take the damn road. Lisa's mother, Margaret, smiled thinly, already planning the pie she'd bake to seal the deal. Her brother, Derek, barely out of college, smirked from the corner, probably plotting how to spin my generosity into his next pitch at the county fair. The papers were signed that afternoon, Harold's pen digging into the page like he was carving his legacy. But I'd added a clause buried in legalese if the family engaged in fraud or exploitation, like Harold's habit of stiffing undocumented workers or fudging government grants. The road rights could trigger a full audit of their land titles. A ticking bomb they never noticed, too busy clapping my back. The road was rebuilt in weeks. Gravel, thick drainage, perfect smooth enough for semis to glide. Their farm roared back, and so did their arrogance. They forgot me fast. At county events, Harold would strut chest-puffed, boasting, "No one touches our land 3 generations strong, and no immigrant's gonna change that." I'd stand there, beer in hand, hearing my role in their salvation rewritten as family grit or a friend's favor. Derek took it further, stealing my logistics software idea to pitch as his own landing a cushy deal with a feed supplier. When I called him out, he laughed. "Relax, Alejandro. Your family share the wealth, right?" Lisa, lounging nearby, just rolled her eyes as if my complaint was beneath her. But the real rot was Harold's shadow empire. He'd built their wealth not just on crops, but on exploitation. I'd seen it firsthand. Undocumented workers from my community, men and women, like my cousins, toiling for pennies. No contracts, no rights. Harold would dangle deportation threats, knowing they'd stay silent. Once I overheard him bragging to a crony about forging a neighbor's deed to snatch their land cheap. Poor bastard didn't even read the fine print, he'd chuckled. Lisa knew, shrugged it off. "Business is business, Alejandro. Don't be so soft." Margaret, ever the silent queen, nodded along her silence louder than words. I'd covered for them once. When a labor inspector sniffed around, I used my name to sign off on the road repairs, burying Harold's shady subsidies in the paperwork. Back then, I thought it was for love for family. They thanked me with a pie and a pat on the head, then went back to slinging slurs at barbecues. "You're lucky," Alejandro Harold said once, whiskey on his breath. "Without us, you'd be back across the border, picking fruit with your people." Now, sitting in my bare apartment, that memory burned. The steel filing cabinet in the corner, a relic from an estate sale, held more than the easement. Inside were records I'd kept forged, deeds, pay stubs showing workers' wages below legal emails, where Harold bragged about dodging taxes. I'd saved them not out of spite, but caution, knowing gratitude fades faster than ink. The survey map lay unrolled before me, the road's black line, a lifeline they'd taken for granted. That clause, that hidden trigger, was no longer just insurance, it was a guillotine. Harold's empire wasn't just crops and cattle. It was a house of cards, built on lies, racism, and stolen labor. Lisa's betrayal, her affair with Harold's sleazy business partner Carl, a smug developer who'd leered at her during every family dinner, was just the cherry on top. I'd found the text while packing her giggling emojis next to Carl's promises of better prospects. The whole family knew had covered it up to keep Carl's investments flowing. They thought I was blind, or worse, too weak to care. They'd forgotten who I was, the kid who'd outsmarted bigger sharks than them to climb out of nothing. The road was mine, the records were mine, and now their reckoning was mine too. I smoothed the map flat my finger, tracing the gravel vein that fed their world. They'd built their castle on my back. Time to pull the cornerstone. The fluorescent buzz of my apartment's single lamp cut sharp shadows across the peeling walls as I sat at my table, the easement agreement spread before me like a battle map. The survey lines the signatures that buried claws. They weren't just paper. They were a loaded spring, coiled for a decade, waiting for my finger to release it. Lisa's smirk, her betrayal with Carl Harold's slurs, Derek's theft, they'd all pushed me to this. But this wasn't about rage. It was about precision, a scalpel, where they expected a sledgehammer. I picked up my phone thumb, hovering over a contact I hadn't touched in years. Marcus, my old college buddy, who'd traded our late-night poker games for a real estate empire. Marcus wasn't just sharp. He was a bloodhound for opportunity, the kind of guy who'd smell a deal before it even formed. Back in school, he'd bet big and win bigger. Now he owned half the county's industrial parks. The twist, his older brother Vince was Lisa's lover, Carl's right-hand man in Harold's shady deals. Marcus had known about the affair, kept it quiet for his own reasons. I didn't care why. I needed his reach, not his loyalty. The call connected on the second ring. Marcus's voice, smooth and amused, hadn't changed. Alejandro, been a minute. What's cooking? I kept it tight, no emotion. I've got something. A road. Sole access to a prime farm. Locked by an airtight easement, no expiration. And a clause that could flip their whole world. Silence on his end, then a low whistle. You're saying you own their lifeline? Exactly, I said. And I want it sold quietly to someone who'll squeeze it dry. He leaned back. I heard the creak of his chair, that old poker tell. Send me the docs. I've got an LLC ready. Clean transfer, no noise until it's done. But you know, once it's mine, I'll play dirty. I nodded to myself. That's the point. Before I sent the easement, I made another move. Those files in my cabinet, Harold's forged deeds, pay stubs, showing pennies for workers, emails bragging about dodging taxes were too potent to sit idle. I scanned them, anonymized them, and emailed them to a local reporter, Jenna, who'd been sniffing around Harold's farm for years. No note, just a subject line. Look closer. If the road was the choke point, this was the spark to light their world on fire. The next morning, I met Marcus at a diner off the highway. The kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like regret. He slid a contract across the table, his LLC's name in bold ironclad holdings. The terms were clear. Every inch of that road, every legal right would transfer to him. But the kicker was the clause I'd slipped in a decade ago. Proof of fraud or exploitation could trigger a county audit, potentially voiding Harold's entire land title. Marcus's eyes gleamed as he read it. You're not just selling a road. You're handing me a guillotine. I shrugged. They sharpened the blade themselves. We signed the papers by noon. The notary's stamp, a dull thud that felt like a gavel. My phone pinged with a bank alert before we left the lot. 6 figures wired to an account Lisa didn't know existed, one I'd set up years ago for future projects. Marcus tucked the contract under his arm, grinning like a shark. Give it a week. They'll feel the noose before they see it. That night, the first ripple hit. Jenna's article dropped online. Local farm faces allegations of worker exploitation, land fraud. It didn't name me, but it quoted those pay stubs, those emails. Social media erupted. Locals who'd worked for Harold families, he'd cheated, all piling on. The comments were brutal. Deportation threats. That's low, even for him. Stole my uncle's land with a fake deed. By morning, the county announced an investigation. Harold's empire was already cracking, and the road hadn't even closed yet. Then came the gate. Marcus didn't waste time. A steel barrier, industrial grade, went up overnight, manned by a guard with a clipboard and zero patience. The first feed truck hit it at dawn, the driver laughing, thinking it was a prank. Toll fee, the guard said, flat as stone. Pay or turn around. The driver called Harold, who roared down in his pickup, face purple, screaming about his land. The guard didn't blink. County records say otherwise. Talk to Ironclad Holdings. Lisa showed up at my apartment that night, eyes blazing, hair a mess coat thrown over sweats. She didn't knock. She pounded like she could break the door down with fury. You did this, she spat, stepping so close I could smell the orange on her breath. You're burning us to the ground. I leaned against the doorframe, letting the silence stretch her words, bouncing off me like rain on glass. You told me to move out, I said, voice calm, almost bored. I just moved my property. Her face twisted, searching for a crack in my calm. Then the twist, she broke voice, dropping to a plea. Alejandro, I messed up. With Carl with you. They pushed me into it. Dad, Vince, all of them. They said you weren't good enough, not one of us. Let's fix this, just us. Her eyes welled up, that old performance she'd mastered. But I'd seen the texts, heard the slurs. And I'd recorded this conversation, every word on my phone tucked in my pocket. Good night, Lisa, I said, shutting the door as her jaw dropped her pleas, cut off by the click of the latch. I sent the recording to Marcus. Use it, I texted. He didn't reply, but I knew he would. The road was his, the scandal was public, and that clause was still ticking. They thought this was about tolls. They had no idea the real blade was still coming. The farm's pulse slowed to a crawl, like a machine grinding down when the gears seize. By the end of the first week, the steel gate Marcus had erected stood like a guillotine slicing Harold's empire from the world. Feed trucks turned back their drivers, unwilling to pay Ironclad Holdings brutal tolls, $500 per vehicle, plus a maintenance surcharge that doubled during harvest. The fields, once Harold's pride, began to stink of rot corn and soybeans wilting under an unforgiving sun. Social media buzzed with Jenna's article, now viral hashtags like Harold Fraud and Justice for Workers trending locally. The county's investigation deepened, auditors combing through Harold's books, unearthing years of forged subsidies and unpaid wages. The air around the farm grew heavy, not just with decay, but with the weight of a legacy unraveling. Harold tried to fight it. He stormed the county office veins, bulging, demanding they reverse the road's transfer. The clerk, a tired woman with a stack of papers, just shrugged. It's legal, Mr. Thompson. Ironclad Holdings owns the easement. You signed it over a decade ago. His face crumpled just for a second before he roared about lawsuits. His lawyer, a graying man who'd grown fat on Harold's payroll, was less optimistic. The clause is airtight, he said, sliding the old easement across the table. Fraud or exploitation triggers an audit of all your titles. And with this investigation, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Harold's empire wasn't just choking, it was on the chopping block. The second twist hit like a thunderclap. Marcus didn't just enforce tolls, he activated the buried clause I'd planted 10 years ago. The county, spurred by Jenna's expose and public outcry, launched a full land audit. Harold's forged deed snatching acres from struggling neighbors came to light. So did his exploitation of undocumented workers. some of whom, emboldened by the scandal, stepped forward with stories of threats and stolen wages. The audit's findings were brutal. Harold's land titles built on fraud were voidable. By week 2, the county froze his assets, and ironclad holdings moved to claim not just the road, but the entire farm, hundreds of acres, barn silos, all of it under the clause's terms. It was legal, surgical, and devastating. Lisa's brother, Derek, took it just as hard. His stolen logistics software, the one he'd parlayed into a cushy deal, was exposed as mine in Jenna's follow-up article. His supplier contract collapsed. His reputation trashed. He showed up at the farmhouse drunk and ranting, blaming Lisa for letting that wetback ruin us. Margaret, the silent matriarch, finally cracked sobbing as she packed family heirlooms as if porcelain could save them. The farmhands, mostly immigrants, Harold had exploited, quit en masse, some joining a class-action lawsuit fueled by the recording I'd sent Marcus Lisa's tearful confession, laced with her family's racist venom, now evidence in court. The third twist was the knockout. Marcus, ever the opportunist, didn't just sell the road's rights. He auctioned the seized land to the highest bidder, a co-op of local farmers, many of them from my community, who'd been cheated by Harold years ago. But he carved out one piece, a small plot, where the Thompson family's ancestral graves lay. He offered it to me, a sly grin in his voice. "Your call, Alejandro." I didn't hesitate. I sold it to the workers. Harold had exploited, the ones he'd threatened with deportation. They turned it into a community garden, a middle finger to his legacy, growing chili peppers and maize where his ancestors' headstones stood. Poetic justice sharp enough to cut. By week 3, the fallout was public. Harold, once the untouchable patriarch, was caught on local news, begging a reporter for a fair shake, his face, haggard voice breaking. Lisa filed for divorce from Carl, who'd bailed when the money dried up. But she was left with nothing, no farm, no reputation, just a rented trailer on the edge of town. Derek lost his job, blacklisted after his theft went public. Margaret retreated to a nursing home, muttering about family pride to anyone who'd listen. The farmhouse was mortgaged to the hilt, then foreclosed, its windows dark, the fields around it fallow. I drove by, once keeping my distance, just close enough to see the rusted gate, the empty silos, the garden thriving where their legacy rotted. No rush of triumph, no gloating, just a cold, steady satisfaction, like finishing a puzzle you've worked on for years. 10 years ago, I'd handed them a lifeline, and they'd spat on it. Now, I'd taken it back, and gravity did the rest. I was nursing a coffee in a quiet downtown cafe, the kind with wobbly tables and a faint hum of conversation, when my phone buzzed. A text from an old friend, still living near the Thompsons' ghost of a farm. Harold just lost it at Lisa's trailer. Screaming about you. Heard it from across the street. I could picture it. Harold, the iron-fisted patriarch who'd once sneered, I'd never touch his world now. A broken man, veins popping, bellowing. Do you know what that bastard did? Lisa probably shrinking in her doorway. Her carefully curated life reduced to a rented box on the edge of nowhere. I leaned back, letting the image settle. Outside, the afternoon light slanted through the cafe window, cars drifting by, oblivious to the collapse of an empire just miles away. The harvest was gone, fields rotting under the weight of neglect. The bank had circled, forcing Harold to mortgage the family home before it was foreclosed. Ironclad. Holdings Marcus's LLC had jacked up the tolls again, 20% higher, with a seasonal fee timed to crush any hope of recovery. Social media was relentless. Harold Fraud now a local legend with memes tearing into his racist rants and forged deeds. The workers he'd exploited were suing their stories splashed across every news outlet, a public shaming that cut deeper than any toll. Lisa called me one last time a week after the farm was auctioned. Her voice was raw, cracked from crying. Alejandro, please. You've made your point. Can't we just talk? I let the silence hang her breaths, jagged on the other end. You told me to move out, I said, voice steady, cold as the gravel under my boots that day I left. I just moved your world. I hung up before she could reply, her plea dissolving into static. The balance in my secret account stared back at me fatter than ever, untouched, a quiet monument to their fall. I'd built this without a shout, a lawsuit, or a single step onto their land. Just paper signatures and time. The final twist wasn't mine. It was theirs, or what was left of it. Word spread that Harold tried to rally the family for a last-ditch fight, dragging Derek and Margaret to a lawyer's office, begging for a loophole. The lawyer just shook his head. The audit's done. The titles are void. Ironclad owns it all. Harold's empire didn't collapse in a blaze. It bled out slow and humiliating in full view of a town that once bowed to his name. The community garden on their ancestral plot. It was thriving, a symbol of justice tended by the hands Harold had crushed. Every chili pepper, every stalk of maize was a reminder their legacy was fertilizer now. I paid my bill, left a generous tip, not out of joy, but because the job was done. Walking into the cool evening, I felt the weight lift not with a rush, but with the calm of a book closed. They'd spend years trying to claw back what I'd taken, but paper remembers and justice erases. They thought they'd erased me. Instead, I'd rewritten their story.